In this lecture, you are going to learn what a pivot table is, what it is good for, and how to use it in many different ways. Pivot table is an intimidating topic for Excel beginners, but I'm going to show you how simple it is. I'm sure that from now on you will use it all the time. Now let's get into it. Pivot table simplifies data analysis, and it also makes it a lot faster. You don't have to spend time with writing formulas or studying function arguments. Even if you have thousands of rows of data, with a few clicks, you can create many different kinds of reports quickly. You can group your data, count them, show totals, sums, averages, etc. You can also use it to make comparisons, check patterns and trends. Pivot table is a powerful tool for making good business decisions. Once you have your pivot table, it's very easy to visualize its data with pivot chart. But in order to utilize all the benefits that pivot table offers, you need a good data structure. First, name your columns properly. Second, make sure that one specific column contains one specific type of data. If your data table is well organized, pivot table creation will be fun. I created a dataset which we will use in this lecture. You can find this in pivot table Excel file in resources. Feel free to download it so you can practice on your own after this lecture. Let's say we have a training company selling online courses. In this table you can see sales transactions. Each transaction has a date. We are selling courses, so we list the course title, its category, and the instructor who created the course. Each course has a list price. We may sell the course with a discount. The revenue is a calculated cell based on the list price and the discount. We have a sales channel and its cost. The profit margin is also a calculated cell taking the revenue minus the marketing cost. And we have course ratings from students, plus we have age information about them. We have over 1,000 rows in this table for a 2-year period. Let's see how we can analyze this data with Excel pivot table. My active cell is inside this dataset and I go to Insert. Let's see what this recommended pivot table list offers. If you have older version of Excel and you don't see this button, don't worry, we are going to create a pivot table from scratch in a minute. So it can sum up revenue by course, by category, by instructor. This one is useless. Sum of marketing cost, that can be interesting. Profit margin by instructor, that can be useful too, and so on. Now I hit cancel and I'm going to show you how to put together a pivot table on your own. So I click on this pivot table button. The Create Pivot Table dialog pops up. Excel automatically locates the range of your data if your active cell is inside the data. Here you can choose if you want to insert the pivot table into a new worksheet or an existing one. If you want to place it on this worksheet, choose this option, click inside this field and click on an empty cell in your worksheet. But I usually put my pivot table on a separate worksheet, so I go back to this option and I hit OK. A new sheet has been created. You can see this image here, which is a placeholder at the moment for the pivot table. We also got 2 new menu ribbons on the top, Analyze and Design. These can be seen only if your pivot table is selected. So if you don't see them, click inside this area. And we got a new pivot table fields panel on the right. If for some reason you close this panel and it doesn't come back even if you click on the pivot table, you can click on this field list button on the Analyze tab. Or you can right-click on the pivot table and choose the Show Field List item in the context menu. Here on the ribbon you can name your pivot table. If you use more than one in your workbook, I encourage you to do so. Let me drag and drop this worksheet here. When you work with pivot tables, Excel uses the term field for column. Wherever you see this field term on forms, it means basically a column in your table. These are the columns or fields from our sales transaction worksheet. You can check them individually, and the checked ones will show up in the pivot table. Let's start with the simple one. I'd like to see the revenue grouped by category. I check the category field. Excel automatically puts the field into one of these areas. In this case, it decided to put it into the rows section, so our categories appear in rows. Notice that whatever you do on this panel, Excel updates the pivot table instantly. If you have a large set of data and your computer slows down, check this Defer Layout Update checkbox and click on the Update button when you are finished with your structure. Now I check the revenue field. Excel applies a sum function on this and puts it into the values area. We can format the values here. I click on this drop-down and I choose Value Field Settings. I click on this Number Format button. The Format Cells panel pops up. Alternatively, you can right-click on a column and choose Number Format menu item. Let me set currency and 0 decimal places. I hit OK. So with a few clicks in a minute, we summed up the revenue by category. Now let's drag and drop this category field into the columns area. And I drag and drop the transaction date into the rows area. In case of date fields, Excel automatically adds further grouping fields to the pivot table. You can see them here and here as well. You can drill them down by clicking on the plus buttons in the table one by one. Or on the Analyze ribbon, you can click on these Expand Collapse field buttons. Or you can right-click here and in the Expand Collapse item, you have further options. I am not really interested in quarters. I can simply drag and drop this field outside the rows area and it will be deleted from the pivot table. So we have a pivot table that shows revenue by month and course category. We can turn off these grand total values. I right-click on it and choose Remove Grand Total. Similarly on this one. If you want to turn it back, click on the pivot table, go to Design, and here you have several options. You also have display options for subtotals in this drop-down. Now I could clean this pivot table by unchecking all the fields here. or I can click on this Clear All button on the Analyze ribbon. But I will keep this pivot table and create a new one. So I hit Undo. I name this worksheet quickly. I create another pivot table on another worksheet. I like to see the profit margin by instructor. Let's format the data. I right-click and choose Number Format. We can sort this data by right-clicking on them and choose Sort Largest to Smallest, for example. By clicking on this button, you have a bunch of options to sort and filter instructors. This can be interesting if you have more data here, but I can filter on the instructor name with the label filter like this. I clear the filter, or I can filter on values showing only instructors with the profit margin above 1000. Let me clear the filter. Now I'd like to see the percent value compared to the grand total next to this profit margin column. Let me grab this profit margin field here, so we have a duplicate. Now I click inside this column and right-click to invoke the context menu. I choose Show Values as % of grand total. And here they are. Let me rename this header. By the way, on the design ribbon, we can choose a different style for our pivot table. Let me choose this one. Let's see some grouping options. Let me select these two instructors. I click on this one, I hold down Ctrl, and I click on this one. I right-click and choose Group. I can rename this group here. Let me turn off these subtotals. Let me put the other instructors into one group. So I hold down Ctrl and select them one by one. Right-click, Group. And I name the group. Now notice that sorting works inside the groups from now on. If I want to sort by group total, I need to show subtotals. Click on one of them, right-click, and sort. Now I can hide subtotals. Now I like to add this sales channel to this report as a filter. I check the sales channel field. Excel puts this into the rows area, but I'd like to have it in the filters area. So I drag and drop it here. A filter drop-down has appeared here at the top. I can check, for example, which instructor performs the best in affiliate campaigns. You can set multiple filters with this checkbox. Now let's say I'd like to see the amount of discount was given by instructor. If I look at my data, there won't be a column like this. It needs to be calculated. Let's create a calculated field in the pivot table. Make sure you are inside the pivot table so you can see the Analyze menu. Let's go there. Click on this Fields, Items and Sets drop-down. And choose Calculated Field item. We can give a name to this new field. I click in the Formula field, I delete the 0, I click on the List Price field, I hit Insert Field, I enter the minus sign, and I double click on the Revenue field to insert it into the formula. I click on the Add button and hit OK. Now let's create another pivot table. I name this worksheet first and create a new pivot table on a new worksheet. I'd like to see a revenue report by age group. So let me check these two fields. I need to drag and drop customer age field here. Let me format the revenue column quickly. Right click, number format, currency, 0 decimal. Now this table quite useless in this format. Let's group the age field. Make sure your active cell is on one of these age values, right click and choose Group. Excel realizes your minimum and maximum values in this column and we can set a grouping range. 10 will be just fine. I hit OK. Let's make this grouping better. I go back to the Group dialog, right click, Group. And I set 20 for the starting at field. I hit OK. Perfect. Now we have a pretty even distribution here because I populated this age column with random numbers. But if you had real-world data, you could create a nice distribution chart from this pivot table. It would show which age group is your primary target, so you could address them more effectively. By the way, you can move a pivot table with this button on the Analyze ribbon. You can move it to a new worksheet, but now I just place it inside this one. I delete this location field, I click on a cell, and I hit OK. Alright. Let's create another pivot table. I'd like to see average customer ratings by instructor and month. Let's put it together. I check transaction date, instructor, and customer rating fields. I drag and drop the instructor to the columns area and the customer rating into values. In value field settings, I change the aggregate function to average. I click on number format. I choose number with 1 decimal place. I hit OK and OK again. I expand date fields. Let me remove this quarters field. We got division by 0 error messages in some cases. And some of the cells are empty. Let's see why, and I'll show you in a minute how to fix that. I'm going to check Kathleen's sales in these 2 months. I go to our datasheet. I hit Ctrl-Shift-L to turn on filters on the columns. I choose Kathleen only here, so only her sales will be shown. We have an error for August. She had only 1 sale with no rating in this month. Okay, what about September? She had no sales in September. I think the empty field is just fine in this case. Let's get rid of these error messages. I right-click on the pivot table and choose Pivot Table Options. Here on the Layout and Format tab, I check this For Error Values Show checkbox. I hit OK, and error messages have gone. Good. Let me hide these grand totals. Now let's create a pivot chart from these data. On the Analyze ribbon, click on Pivot Chart. I choose the line type and hit OK. I take this column narrower. Let me close this panel and take this chart bigger. Now we could spend some time with formatting this chart to make it look nicer, but let me just set this dark style under the design menu. Let me hide these fields here. Right click, hide, right click, hide. Let me double click on this vertical axis and set a constant 5 for the maximum and 1 for the major unit. It seems obvious that Jasmine is our best instructor based on customer ratings. And Jamie also performs excellent. Now Christina and Kathleen definitely need attention. A pivot table and chart like this can help you to pinpoint issues in your business that need to be addressed. Now one more important thing. Let's say we have new data coming into our data table. I insert a row here, adding a sale for Kathleen for September. If I go back to the pivot table, nothing seems to be changed. you need to click on this refresh button on the Analyze ribbon or hit the shortcut Alt F5 or right-click on the pivot table and choose Refresh. And the new data will appear in both the pivot table and on the pivot chart. Now with the refresh, the first column width was auto-sized. This can be annoying if you spend some time with adjusting your column widths. Let's right-click on the pivot table options, and I uncheck this auto fit option here. Hit OK. Good. Finally, let me add the slicer for this chart, which is kind of a filter. I click on Insert Slicer, I check Instructor and hit OK. In this Columns field, I enter 7 as we have 7 instructors. I resize the slicer, I set this style. If you are not impressed with the default styles that I would understand, you can create your own style here. I rearrange these objects like this. I right-click on the slicer and choose Slicer Settings. I uncheck Display Header and click OK. Now I can filter data by instructor. I can hold down Ctrl to select multiple instructors. And with right-click on the slicer, I can clear the filter to show all of them. Let me name this worksheet quickly. Alright, I hope you found this lecture interesting. Feel free to use these test data to experiment with pivot table. See you in the next video.